Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachos of the minim, and we're in the middle of a very interesting Siman Tafresh Mem Tes that discusses various different psulim that can passel the minim for use on Yom Tov. Today we have a very interesting couple of seifim over here. The first sif continues to discuss minim that in some way have shaykhis to avodah zara, whether they belong to avodah zara or not. Now, in Yeridea, in halachos avodah zara, the Mechaber discusses really four different categories of property of avodah zara that becomes aser bahana. We have avodah zara itself, something which is worshipped as avodah zara, is aser bahana. We have what's known as takrovis avodah zara, something that's sacrificed to avodah zara. You take an animal, you sacrifice it to avodah zara. That animal is aser bahana as takrovis avodah zara. Doesn't have to be an animal. The Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea speaks about a case. Let's say you have an avodah zara where one of the ways you worship the avodah zara is by taking some kind of a stick and making noise with the stick. Maybe you bang the stick on the ground, so you have some kind of staff, you bang it on the ground, and that's part of the worship of avodah zara. And now you take the stick and you break it as an act of sacrificing it, right? When you take an animal, what do? You slaughter it. So how do you slaughter a stick? By breaking it. You break it and you offer it up to the avodah zara. That would also be takrovis avodah zara. So we have the avodah zara itself, we have takrovis avodah zara, then we have noye avodah zara, which is something that's used to beautify avodah zara. Also becomes aser bahana. So avodah zara, noye avodah zara, takrovis avodah zara, and the fourth category is escaping me right now. Give me 1 second. Do I have your day here? I don't have your day here. Takrovis avodah zara, noye avodah zara, avodah zara. Mishamshe avodah zara. Those are items, objects that are used in the service of the avodah zara. So let's say you have an avodah zara that you perform a service for by burning incense, and you have a censer. That's the keli, the vessel that you burn incense in. So that would be mishamshe avodah zara. That would be an object, a tool, a vessel that's used in the service of avodah zara. So these are various types of things that become aser bahana from the halachos of avodah zara. How about something that just simply belongs to avodah zara? Something that's the property of avodah zara is not necessarily aser bahana. If it's not mishamshe, it's not takrovis, it's not noye, it's just something that happens to be the property of avodah zara. That in of itself does not make it aser bahana. So now let's take a look here on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Amid Beis, Siman Tafresh Mem Tes Sif Dal. Says the Mechaber, Ganois Hatziirim Shel Ovdei Kechavim. Gardens that belong to the Tziirim of Ovdei Kechavim. Now exactly what are Tziirim? Well, the Mishnah Berurah says on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Amid Beis in Ois Chav Hey, Hatziirim Hu Inyan Mi Misharsei Ha'akum. This has something to do with those who serve the avodah zara. I'm tempted to say, from the word tzi'irim, it sounds, a tza'ir. These are the youth, the young ones. It sounds to me like we might be talking about the acolytes, the young acolytes of the avodah zara, maybe something akin to the monks of the avodah zara. But these are people, I don't know if you want to call them kumrim or kehanim, galochim. These are monks or acolytes that are dedicated to the service of the avodah zara. And they have gardens. What does it mean that they have gardens? So we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah precisely what this speaks of, but it sounds to me like what we're talking about here. They have gardens that were dedicated to the upkeep and the support of the acolytes. So the avodah zara needs to have a way to financially support its monks, its priesthood. So sometimes what they would do is they would have gardens, and the gardens aren't there for the service of the avodah zara itself. The gardens are there so that they could produce, let's say, fruits, which are then sold, and the income is used for the support of the priesthood. So that's Ganais HaTzi'irim Shel Ovdei Kechavim. You have these gardens that belong, they're dedicated to the Tzi'irim, the acolytes of the Avodah Kechavim, V'Kayotze Behem, or similar types of gardens, Mibate Shamoshehem, that are by the buildings where the ones who not serve as in worship the avodah zara, but the mishamshim. Again, that's like the priesthood of the avodah zara. So there's a priesthood. There are monks or acolytes, and they have buildings that they live and work in. And again, they have gardens that are used to support them. Says the Mechaber, muter lital misham lulav oishar minim lemitzvah. You would be allowed to take a lulav or one of the other daled minim from one of these gardens to use in the mitzvah of the daled minim. So let's take a look here at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Chavav, very interesting Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah kind of compares the Mechaber's ruling over here to the Mechaber's ruling in Hilchas Avodah Zara in Yeridea in Siman Kuf Mem Gimel. And the Chavetz Chaim says, Hine Lefia Mavur B'Yeridea Siman Kuf Mem Gimel Siv Gimel. From what we see in Yeridea Siman Kuf Mem Gimel Siv Gimel, over there the Mechaber seems at face value to be discussing a very, very similar case. The Mechaber over there talks about either a Beis HaMerchatz, a bathhouse, or a garden or an orchard that belongs to the avodah zara, and the income is used again to the support of the tzi'irim. Now, what's the Mechaber's ruling over there? So the Chavetz Chaim says, if you look in Kuf Bem Gimel Siv Gimel, Ubishach va'ateres zikenim sham, and if you look at the Shach in Sivkat Hey, who brings down a ruling from the Ateres zikenim, Ein muter lital mehem ki im kishuhu b'chinam. The Mechaber says over there, you're allowed to take items from these gardens, you're allowed to derive benefit from the Beis HaMerchatz, but you're only allowed to do it shaloi b'toiva, which the Shach brings down from the Ateres Zikenim, means you're allowed to derive benefit from the Beis HaMerchatz. You could go there and take a bath, you could take a shower, you could get apples from the orchard. However, only shaloi b'toiva. You cannot pay for the apples, you cannot pay for the use of the Beis HaMerchatz. Now again, at face value, the two cases, the case over here in Siman Tov Reish Mem Tes and Archaim, and the case in Kuf Mem Gimel in Yeridea seem to be very much the same case. In Yeridea, we're discussing a Beis HaMerchatz. You want to derive Hana from the Beis HaMerchatz. Says the Mechaber, you're allowed to derive Hana from the Beis HaMerchatz because the Beis HaMerchatz is not Osir B'Hana. The Beis HaMerchatz is not avodah zara itself. Nobody's worshiping the Beis HaMerchatz. It's not takroivis avodah zara. Nobody is sacrificing the Beis HaMerchatz to the avodah zara. It's not noye avodah zara. It wasn't placed there to beautify the avodah zara, and it's not mishamshe avodah zara. It's not used in the service of the avodah zara. So it's property that belongs to the avodah zara, and its purpose is to make an income to support the priesthood. Says the Mechaber, you want to go take a shower? You could go take a shower. It's not Osir B'Hana. You want to take an apple and eat an apple? You could eat an apple. It's not Osir B'Hana. But the Mechaber says, you cannot pay for it. You can't give money to the avodah zara in exchange for the benefit that you're getting. That's what the Mechaber rules in Yeridea. Now, what's bothering the Mishnah Berurah over here is that over here, the Mechaber doesn't make such a distinction. Over here, the Mechaber says, same case, right? You have an orchard of date palm trees, and you want to take a lulav. The Mechaber says over here, muter lital misham lulav oishar minim lemitzvah. You are allowed to take a lulav from this date palm orchard that belongs to the avodah zara. Now, does the mechaber qualify his ruling and say you're allowed to take a lulav, but you're not allowed to buy a lulav? The mechaber doesn't make that qualification. So the Chavetz Chaim is bothered. Why is it that in Yeridea we have this qualification that you're not allowed to pay for it, and yet over here in our Chaim we don't seem to have that qualification? That's what's bothering the Chavetz Chaim over here. Now again, as far as making use of the lulav, that's not a problem. It's not Asur B'Hana. It's not avodah zara, takrovis avodah zara, noyei avodah zara, or mishamshei avodah zara. So it's not Asur B'Hana. But again, in Yeridea, the mechaber is very careful to say you cannot pay for it. Over here, the mechaber doesn't seem to make that distinction. So again, Hinei lefi hamavur b'Yeridea Siman kufbem gimel siv gimel u'b'shach v'ateres aked misham ein motor litol mayhem kiyim kishahu b'chinam. Over there in Yeridea, the mechaber rules that you're only allowed to take if you take it for nothing, but you're not allowed to pay. V'loy b'schar. Afilu im hamois noitlen ha'keihanim la'atzman v'loy la'avodas keichavim. And it's very clear over there that this is true even if when you pay the money for the use of the Beis HaMerchatz, the money is not really going to the avodah zara. The money is going to the galach. The money is going to the monks. They're using it to buy their supper. So it's not going to the avodah zara per se. It's not going to the worship of the avodah zara. It's going to support the infrastructure. It's going to support the priesthood. Even so, says the mechaber over there in Yeridea, you're not allowed to pay. Now over there, if you take a look, what the Mefarshim say, the reason you're not allowed to pay is because there's a concern that what are the Kehanim going to do with the money? We're suggesting that the Kehanim are going to use it to buy their breakfast, their lunch, and their supper, and their shoes. However, the Mefarshim say it's also possible that the money will be diverted by the Kehanim for the service of the avodah zara, and that's why you can't pay. Nonetheless, we don't find the mechaber making such a distinction, making such a qualification over here to say that you're allowed to take the lulav, but you're not allowed to pay for the lulav. So the Chavetz Chaim answers this, and he says, the efsher, a possible way out of this problem is, Desham, over there in Yeridea, Mairi, the mechaber is discussing a case, Shemitchila nodvu hagina l'shem havodah zara. Over there, the Chavetz Chaim suggests in Yeridea, the reason it's more chamor and you're not allowed to pay is because over there we're talking about a gina, a garden, that was donated to the avodah zara. Somebody had a field, or somebody had an apple orchard, and he donated it to the avodah zara. He didn't donate it for the upkeep of the priesthood. He donated it to the avodah zara. So to speak, he was makdish it. He consecrated it to the avodah zara. Now, the avodah zara took it. What was the avodah zara going to do with it? The avodah zara said, oh great, we have an apple orchard. You know what we'll sell the apples and we'll use the money to give it to the priests, to pay the priests. The fruits have been dedicated to the upkeep of the mishamshim, of those who work for the avodah zara. But since the gina was originally actually consecrated to the avodah zara, says the Chavetz Chaim, lahachi also lahanois lemishamsheha. That's why over there in Yeridea, the mechaber rules that you're not allowed to pay money for the apples or for the use of the Beis HaMerchatz, even though the money is not going to the avodah zara itself, it's going to the mishamshim of the avodah zara. But since we're talking about a Beis HaMerchatz or a gina that was actually given to the avodah zara, we don't want you to give money, because the bottom line is you're giving money to a gina that was donated to the avodah zara. So it at least looks like you're giving money straight to the avodah zara. However, v'hacha, over here, says the Chavetz Chaim, here in our Chaim, that's not the case we're dealing with. V'hacha mairi shagina loy nadvu me olam l'shem avodas gelulim. Over here, we're not talking about a gina that was given to the avodah zara. The gina was not given to the avodah zara at all. So what's happening over here? It sounds like what's happening is some concerned community member knows that there are 50 priests that work for the avodah zara and they need to be supported. So this fellow said, you know what? You guys need money. Here, I have an apple orchard. I'm giving you an apple orchard. Sell the apples, you'll make money. but he never consecrated it to the avodah zara. So it never became really property of the avodah zara. And now if you go buy a lulav from that gina, it doesn't really look like you're buying a lulav from the church. You're buying a lulav from that apple orchard. Oh, there's an apple orchard over there on Route 9. You can get delicious apples over there. The Ramah suggests that maybe it's not even on the property of the avodah zara. That's a Ramah in Yeridea. Certainly, if it's not even on the property of avodah zara, you could picture this in your mind. Maybe nobody even knows that gina has any shaykhis to the avodah zara. Let me ask you something. Did you know that if you buy a Hershey bar, did you know that Hershey is a non-profit corporation? What? Hershey? Non-profit corporation? Yeah. What's Hershey all about? Old man, Mr. Hershey, he went ahead and he created this company of Hershey chocolate to support an orphanage. So people buy Hershey bars, they're supporting an orphanage. Who had any idea that this had anything to do with an orphanage? Right? What do you mean? It must be a big company. The competition of Nestle. You have Hershey and you have Nestle and you have other chocolate companies. Guess what? It's actually a not-for-profit and it's actually supporting an orphanage. So you have a gina. It's not the avodah zara's gina. It's a gina where the income from the gina is going ahead and being diverted to the priesthood. Okay, but when you buy a lulav, it doesn't really look like you're buying a lulav from the church. So that's how the Chavetz Chaim suggests to get out of the stira between Yeridea and Archaim. Continues the Chavetz Chaim over here. Uladas Ramah Sham Ba'agah. According to the opinion of the Ramah over there in Yeridea, the Ramah says that if the Gina or the Beis HaMerechas, you could only aser it if it's on the property of the avodah zara. But if it's not even located next to the avodah zara is in one place, and then 10 miles away there's a Beis HaMerechas. Nobody even makes the connection between the two. According to the Ramah, certainly if the pardes or the Beis HaMerechas is not on the actual property of the avodah zara, and the money that you're paying only goes to the kehanim, and it's not going to the avodah zara itself, ayin sham, it would seem over there that definitely you would be able to be makel. So the Mechaber said you could take a lulav and you could use it lemitzvah. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Kalmakim, nevertheless, even though strictly speaking this is mutter, if you could get hold of a different lulav or a different esrog, even if they're not as nice as this one that comes from the avodah zara, you would be better off getting a different lulav or a different esrog, even though it's not as nice. Brings this down from the Sefer Chasidim. Vayin beBir Halacha, he sends you to the Bir Halacha, who has a lengthier discussion on this topic. Okay, now let's go to the Ramah, the parentheses, second line down in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Ramah, even if the tree that the lulav is coming from is actually planted by the avodas kechavim, kolzman she'ein oivdin ha'ilan, as long as the ilan is not itself an avodah zara. So, technically speaking, you're allowed to do this. You could use such a lulav. Again, the reason this is okay is because, like I spoke out in the beginning, this ilan is not avodah zara. It's not takrovis avodah zara. It's not noye avodah zara. It's not mishamshe avodah zara. And that's why it's not osir ba'ana. There's no problem. And that's why the Ramah said, even if the ilan is planted next door to the avodas kechavim, if they don't worship it, then technically this is mutter. As long as they don't actually worship the tree. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, if they actually start to worship the tree, so now they're making the tree an avodah zara, so now it's going to fall back to the rules that we learned yesterday. If they start worshiping the tree, then oisan halulavin v'haperos, the date palm branches, the lulavim, or the fruits, shenimtzu az al ha'ilan, any fruit or any branches that were already on the tree before they started to worship it. So remember the rule that we learned yesterday. Mechubal karka doesn't become aser bahana. Al heharim Eloheihem. We only have a problem of Isser Hana when the avodah zara is on the mountain. V'loi heharim Eloheihem. But the mountains themselves, the Mechubal Karka, does not get the status of avodah zara, and it does not become Aser Bahana. So if you have a tree that was never an avodah zara, and it already grew lulavim, it already grew esrayim, whatever is already there, if they start to worship the tree now, all of that material that was already there is Mechubal Karka and does not now become Aser Bahana as avodah zara. And therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, if they now started to worship the tree, then any lulavim, any peiros, any esrogim that were already on the tree, asurin lechatchila, you cannot use them for daled minim, because asurin lechatchila legavaya, they're also lechatchila to be used for a mitzvah. Why? The mois, because they're reprehensible, they're abhorrent. Because lamaisa they're being used for avodah zara, but technically they're not aser, because since they're mechubal karka, they're not aser bana. Since they're not aser bana, there's no ketuse mechtas shiurei or any other problem over here, and there's no problem of it's not aser bana at all. There's no problem. Lechatchila you can't use them because they're moas, but b'di'eved you could use them. That's whatever was on the tree. That's whatever predated the worship of the avodah zara. However, the new growth that grows on the tree after the worship began, asurin af lehedyet, that becomes aser bahana. Remember what we said yesterday. Even though it's mechubal karka, if you start worshiping the tree, whatever grows new, whatever comes after they started worshiping the tree, that does become aser bahana as avodah zara, and that's completely also ba'ana, even not for a mitzvah purpose. Asur af lehedyet, even for regular use. You want to take a 2x4 from that tree. If it came from the new growth, you can't. It's asur ba'ana. Kamuvur b'yardei simin kof mem hey sef aleph. And this, you wouldn't be able to use it if you tried to use it to be yotze the mitzvah of daled minim on the first day of Yom Tov. You wouldn't even be yotze b'di'eved, because since it's asur ba'ana, it's not lochem. It's all, you're not going to say ketuse mechta shiure because it's the avodah zara of a guy. Technically, the guy could still be mavatalit. But since right now it's aser ba'ana, you can't say lochem. So on the first day, you're not even yotze b'di'eved. The rest of Yom Tov, like we learned yesterday, you would be yotze b'di'eved. Lechatchila you can't use it, but b'di'eved you would be yotze. V'yesh omrim. Now the Mishnah Berurah says v'yesh omrim. There are those that say, brings us down from the Pri Megadim. Let's say you had lulavim on this tree, you had a sroigim on a tree, and then the goyim started to worship the tree. If a non-Jew cuts the esrog or cuts the lulav off the tree, the nasan Yisrael, and he gives it to a yid, shari mitam bittul. Now it's going to be completely mutter, because that's called being mavatal the avodah zara. V'af legavoya shari, and you could even use it in the service of shamayim. You could even use it for the mitzvah. V'loy mikri mos. It's not even considered abhorrent. It's not even considered mos. Why? Mishum shenishtana shinui gadol. The b'shas avodah loy haya ha'esrig v'lulavin. The gadol achrei came. At the time that the tree was worshipped, the esrig wasn't here. The date palm wasn't here. It grew later. So normally we say that the new growth that comes after the worship, that's going to be aser. It's certainly aser lechatchila, right? But suggests the Pri Megadim that if a goy goes ahead and cuts the esrog off the tree, that's called bittul. And not only is it called bittul, it's also called a shinui. Since it wasn't here when the tree was worshipped, and now it grew, it never had a strong connection to the worship of the avodah zara. Okay. Now we go to Sifhei. Totally different topic. Says the Mechaber. Kol elu sha'amarnu. All of the various psulim that we have been discussing in the Daled Minim, Kol Elu She'amarnu, Shehem Psulin, where the Daled Minim are puzzle, Mipnei Mumin Shebe'arnu, either because of the various types of blemishes that we've discussed. So, for example, we learned that an esrog is puzzle if it has a chazazis. Why is an esrog puzzle if it has a chazazis condition? Because it's not hodar, it's not beautiful. So we have psulim in the Daled Minim that are puzzle because they have blemishes that make them not hodar. We also have psulim like, let's say, the pitim is removed, or the ukitz is removed, or a piece of the esrog is removed. We said that that's puzzle because of chasar. So that's another type of mum, another type of imperfection in the esrog. Oi, continues the Mechaber, mipnei gezel ugeneva. Or you have one of the Daled Minim that are puzzle, like we said here in Siman Reish Mem Tes, that they're puzzle because they're stolen. Okay, that could be a chesaron of lachem. Could also be a chesaron of mitzvah baba avera. Says the Mechaber, Yom Tov harishon bilvad. This only applies to the first day of Yom Tov, aval b'shar yamim hakol kosher. So the Mechaber makes a very broad statement. The Mechaber says, we have been discussing all of these various psulim in Daled Minim, chasar, hadar, gozol, sha'ul, all of these different types of problems that we've been discussing. Says the Mechaber, only a problem on the first day of Yom Tov when the mitzvah of Daled Minim is a daraisa, but from the second day of Yom Tov and on, they are not problematic. Okay, that's the sheet of the Mechaber, which is coming straight out of the Rambam. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Chavtes. Kol Elu. Hu Lashon Rambam. This comes straight from the Rambam. V'sasam ha-Mechaber l'dina k'moisai. And the Mechaber rules lockstep with the Rambam. V'das ha-Ramah bazeh yavor l'kamei. Don't get too excited, because we're going to see the Ramah, and we paskin like the Ramah. We're going to see the Ramah coming up, at least Ashkenazim. We paskin like the Ramah, and we're going to see the Ramah's take on this in tomorrow's shir. All of these various types of psulin, where we have blemishes that passel the Daled Minim. Da, you should know. We've discussed blemishes that passel the Daled Minim because of a lack of hadar. We learned all the way at the beginning that the requirement of hadar, that they should be beautiful, applies to all of the Daled Minim, not just to the esrog. Since all of the Daled Minim are listed in one pasuk, we take the requirement of hadar that's written by the esrog, pre-eitz hadar, and we apply it to all of the Daled Minim. So some of the psulim that we learned about are because of a lack of hadar. V'yesh mishum shei b'chlal chaser. And we learned about some that are a problem of chaser. V'das Rambam, it's the opinion of the Rambam, bekulam, by all of them, lahachsher miyom rishon ve'elach. The Rambam rules that all of the psulim, even the psul of hadar, many Rishonim disagree with the Rambam, and they learn that the psul of hadar applies for the entire Yom Tov. The psul of chasar maybe is only on the first day, but the psul of hadar is on the entire Yom Tov. The Rambam disagrees. The Rambam learns that the psul of hadar, the psul of chasar, they only apply on the first day. And we will see the opinion of the other paiskim as we go along further. Now, the Chavetz Chaim points out an interesting problem. We seem to have a stira between this Mechaber over here in Sif A and the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. If you go back to Sif Aleph, where we were talking about Kufyot Tesam and Beis, we were talking about the Daled Minim that were Gozol or Gonov. What did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said, V'yesh mi sha'omer, there are those that say, Deloy nifsal Gozol v'Gonov, that the Daled Minim that are stolen are not puzzle on the rest of Yom Tov, from the second day and on, Elo leganev legazlan atzmai, only to the ganev or the gazlan who stole it himself. Now, let's remember, what are the psulim? What renders a stolen lulav esrog? So when we started a stolen lulav or a stolen esrog, what renders them puzzle? Why are they puzzle for use? So when we began Siman Reish Mem Tes, we pointed out that there are two different possible problems with a stolen one of the daled minim. One is that there's a requirement of lochem. The daled minim have to belong to you. Ulekachtem lochem. They have to be your property. If you stole them, then they're not lochem. That's problem number one. Now, that problem only applies to day one, because the requirement of lachem is only on the first day of Yom Tov, when the mitzvah of daled minim is a daraisa. The rest of Yom Tov, where there is no daraisa of daled minim, the daraisa of daled minim, the rest of Yom Tov is only in the Beis Hamikdash. But outside of the Beis Hamikdash, there is no daraisa requirement of daled minim the rest of Yom Tov. So the rest of Yom Tov, there is no requirement of lachem. What is the second possible psul of a stolen lulav? Mitzvah haba ba'avera. You're not allowed to be b'kayim a mitzvah at the same time that you're being over an avera. That would be a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So here in Sif Aleph, in Taf Reish Mem Tes Sif Aleph, the Mechaber said, there's a yesh mi she'omer that a stolen lulav is only puzzle from day 2 and on for the ganav of the gazlan himself, because by him he has a problem with mitzvah ba'avera. He is stealing this one of the daled minim, so he can't be yotze because it's a mitzvah ba'avera. But aval acherim, but for other people, kosher b'shar yomim. For other people where there is no issue of mitzvah ba'avera, because they're not the one who stole or is stealing this piece of the daled minim, so for them there is no mitzvah ba'avera. So why should it be puzzled? There's no requirement of lachem on the rest of Yom Tov. Chutz b'yom rishon. So for other people, other than the Gana for the Gazlan, there's only a psul on day 1, when there's a problem of lachem. The rest of Yom Tov, there is no problem, because mitzvah ba'avera doesn't apply to them. But for the Gana for the Gazlan himself, the stolen one of the daled minim is not usable on day 1 because it's not lachem, and it's not usable the rest of Yom Tov either because of mitzvah ba'avera. That's what the Mechaber told us in Sif Aleph. Now, what did the Mechaber tell me over here in Sif Hey? In Sif Hey, the Mechaber tells me, Kol elu sh'amarnu shem psulim memnuim shebayarnu oy mipnei gezel ugeneva, even a stolen one of the daled minim, b'yom tov harishon b'vad. It's only aser on the first day. Aval b'shar yomim hakol kosher. But the rest of Yom Tov, everything is kosher. What? Over here, he tells me that a stolen lulav, a stolen esrog, is only aser on day 1. And he doesn't qualify that statement. He doesn't say that there's a difference between the God of himself and anybody else. He says it flat out. He says it min hastam. He says very stam. The psul of gazal and ganav is only on day 1. And the implication is it's only on day 1, even for the God of himself. Otherwise, he should have qualified his statement. But in Sif Aleph, he tells me that ganav and gazal is aser for the ganiv, right? Not only on day 1, but even on the rest of Yom Tov. How do you reconcile Sif Aleph and Sif Hey? And that's the problem that the Chavetz Chaim is tackling over here in Ois Katan Lamed, where the Chavetz Chaim says, Umashe kosa mipnei gezel ugeneva b'yom tov harishon. This that the Mechaber says, that gezel and gazel and ganav is only a problem on the first day. And the implication is that it's not a problem on the rest of Yom Tov, even for the ganav himself. While in Sif Aleph, he said that for the ganav himself, it's also even for the rest of Yom Tov. Taima, the rationale is, Kevin the Yom Tov Sheni Yehu D'Rabbanan Mutar Hagazel, from the second day and on, a stolen one of the daled minim is kosher. Afal Gav Devi Mitzvah Ba'avera, even though it's a Mitzvah Ba'avera. That's the rationale of the Rambam, and the Mechaber is following the Rambam. See, the Rambam holds that Mitzvah Haba Ba'avera does not apply to a Mitzvah D'Rabbanan. So the Rambam makes perfect sense. The Rambam says you have a stolen one of the daled minim. 2 potential problems. Problem number 1, lachem. Lachem only applies on day 1. Doesn't apply after that. Potential problem number 2, mitzvah ba'avera. Okay, according to the Rambam, mitzvah ba'avera also only applies on day 1 and not from day 2 and on, because from day 2 and on is only a mitzvah drabanan, and mitzvah ba'avera doesn't apply to drabanans. That's the rationale of the Rambam. But now, what do we do with the Mechaber? The Mechaber over here is following the Rambam. He's pasketing like the Rambam, and therefore he says, Gazal, Ganav, day 2 and on, it's fine, even for the Ganav himself, because there's no problem of mitzvah ba'avera on a drabanan. But what happened to Sif Aleph? On Sif Aleph, he says that Ganav and Gazal is a problem for the Ganav himself from day 2 and on. So says the Chavetz Chaim, Kosher, this is schwer. The Sif Aleph Kamar, in Sif Aleph the Mechaber says, the loy nifsal Ganav and Gazal, elo leganav ulegazal atzmai. In Sif Aleph he says that a stolen one of the Daled Minim is only usher from day 2 and on for the Ganav himself. But for the Ganav himself, it is usher. It's very clear in Sif Aleph that even on the second day of Yom Tov and on for the rest of Yom Tov, it is usher for the Ganav himself. And that could only be because of mitzvah ba'avera. And yet over here he's paskening like the Rambam that mitzvah ba'avera doesn't apply. V'tiritz Magen Avram, the Magen Avram answers. The hasam rak le'inyan lechatchila. Says the Magen Avram that in Sif Aleph, the Mechaber was talking lechatchila. It's Sif Aleph, even though the Rambam paskins there's no mitzvah ba'avera on a drabana, that's b'diavad. So the Mechaber doesn't want to paskin that way lechatchila. Lechatchila, he holds, you shouldn't use it. V'hachamayri le'inyan etzem adin. And over here, he's not talking about only lechatchila. Over here, he's talking about midin. Over here, he's talking about that really al pidin. It's completely mutter. Because Lamaisa there's no mitzvah ba'avera on a drabanan. Lichatchila, you shouldn't use it. But b'di'evet, it's fine. Aval Yom Tov Arisha, the kol yamaloi debina lachem. V'ayin b'bi'er halacha. Okay. Ais kat lamed aleph, hakol kosher. According to the Rambam, from the second day on, all of these psulim that we spoke about, hadar, chasar, ganav, gazel, from the second day on, they're all okay. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, when we come up in bracha, beganav gazel, as far as making a bracha on a stolen one of the dalminim, gam l'das Rambam in levarich, even according to the Rambam, you should not make a bracha because of the beitzeh berech nietz Hashem. Miss Hashem will continue tomorrow with the Ramah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabbi should send Yeshua Sefurus Parnasset Sheduchim to all the need, and we should be zeichet to see the B'Yeskel Tzedek. B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.